On Father's Day, my daughter Amanda handed me a pair of socks worth $12, smiling like she'd just given me the world. That same afternoon, I saw an $8,500 Rolex gleaming on her father-in-law's wrist, bought with money she'd borrowed from me for emergency surgery. After that discovery, she called me 17 times, her voice cracking through the phone. "Dad, please don't do this." But it was already too late. I was done being the fool. My name is Raymond Fletcher. I'm 60 years old, and this is the story of how I finally learned to say no. The morning sun streamed through my living room windows in our quiet Milwaukee suburb, painting everything in that soft golden light that used to make me feel hopeful. I was sitting on the same worn couch where I'd watched Amanda grow up, where we'd spent countless evenings after her mother Sarah passed 18 years ago. The fabric was faded now, worn thin from decades of use, but it held memories in every fiber. The old mantel clock had stopped working years back, but I kept it there anyway. Some things you just can't let go of, even when they don't serve you anymore. Like hope, like trust in your own daughter. I was waiting for Amanda to arrive with her Father's Day surprise. At 60, after 35 years working the line at the General Motors plant, I'd learned not to expect much from life. The plant had closed 2 years ago, and my pension barely covered the basics. But there's still that little spark in an old man's heart that hopes his kid remembers what you mean to them. Around me, the house felt too quiet. I'd gotten used to the silence since Sarah died, but today it felt different. Heavier somehow, like the air before a storm. The family photos on the mantel watched me with their frozen smiles. Amanda at 5, gap-toothed and laughing. At 16, in her graduation cap. At her wedding 3 years ago, radiant in white lace that cost more than my monthly pension. I'd paid for that dress, just like I'd paid for her college, her car, the down payment on her house. Every sacrifice had seemed worth it then. Sarah used to say Amanda was our greatest achievement, and after Sarah passed, making sure Amanda had everything became my life's mission. The doorbell rang, cutting through my thoughts, and my heart did that little jump it always did when Amanda came by. I opened the door to find her standing there with Tyler, her husband of 3 years. Amanda looked polished as always, her blonde hair perfectly styled in one of those expensive cuts that somehow looked effortless. She was wearing a designer coat that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget, its crisp lines and perfect fit screaming money I didn't have. Tyler stood behind her with that smirk I'd never quite learned to like, his hands shoved in his expensive jacket pockets. Everything about him was calculated to impress, from his perfect teeth to his manicured nails. He worked for his father's car dealership empire, though I'd never been clear on what exactly he did there besides exist. "Happy Father's Day, Dad," Amanda said, holding out a small gift bag. Her smile was bright, but something felt off about it, like when you're watching TV and the sound doesn't quite match the picture. I took the bag, feeling how light it was. The tissue paper crinkled under my fingers, and I noticed it was slightly wrinkled like it had been reused. "Thanks, sweetheart. Come on in." They followed me into the living room, but neither of them sat down. Amanda kept checking her phone, that expensive device that never seemed to leave her hand. Tyler was looking around like he was pricing the furniture for a yard sale, his eyes calculating and cold. The house suddenly felt smaller with their restless energy filling it up. I settled into my recliner, the one I'd bought secondhand when Amanda was in high school. It creaked under my weight, a familiar sound that usually comforted me. Today it just reminded me of how old everything in my life had become, including me. I reached into the bag and pulled out a pair of navy blue socks, the kind you'd find in the clearance bin at Walmart, still wrapped in their plastic packaging. The price tag was still attached, swinging slightly, $12.99, marked down from $16. "Socks," I said, holding them up and forcing a smile. "Well, these'll keep my feet warm." Amanda laughed, but it sounded hollow, like an echo in an empty room. "Practical, right? You always say you don't need anything fancy." Tyler chuckled from over by the window, where he was examining one of Sarah's ceramic birds with obvious disdain. "Yeah, Ray, you're a simple guy. No point in throwing money around on stuff you don't need." The way he said it, like being practical was something to be pitied, made my jaw tighten. The condescension dripped from his voice like honey from a broken jar. But I just nodded and folded the socks carefully, setting them on the coffee table between us, like a peace offering to my own disappointment. "Appreciate it. Both of you," I said, though the words tasted like ash in my mouth. "We can't stay long," Amanda said, already moving toward the door like she was escaping from something unpleasant. "We're having dinner with Gregory and Linda. You know how Gregory likes to host these big family gatherings. Gregory Morrison, Tyler's father. The man owned 3 car dealerships across Milwaukee and never let anyone forget it. I'd met him a handful of times at family events, and each time he'd managed to work his net worth into the conversation within the first 10 minutes. He had a way of looking at you that made you feel like he was calculating your worth down to the penny and finding it lacking." "Sure thing," I said, standing up from my recliner. "Tell them I said hello." The words came out automatically, the kind of polite response you give when you're trying to keep peace in the family. But inside, something was starting to shift. A small voice in the back of my mind was asking why my daughter couldn't spare an hour on Father's Day for the man who'd raised her alone for 18 years. They were gone before I could even offer them coffee. The front door closed with a soft click, and suddenly, the house felt different. Not the comfortable quiet I was used to, but the kind of silence that makes you notice all the empty spaces in your life. I stood there for a moment, holding those $12 socks, listening to their car engine fade into the distance. I walked slowly back to the kitchen, my footsteps echoing on the hardwood floors Sarah and I had installed ourselves 25 years ago. Everything in this house told a story, from the scratches on the doorframe where we'd marked Amanda's height each year, to the small burn mark on the counter where Sarah had set down a hot pan one Christmas morning. I set the socks on the counter next to my laptop, a 5-year-old machine that still did everything I needed it to do. I'd gotten into the habit of checking Facebook while I had my morning coffee, mostly to see pictures of old work buddies' grandkids and catch up on plant reunion news. But today, something made me scroll through Amanda's page instead. Maybe it was the hollow sound of her laugh, or the way Tyler had looked at my furniture like it belonged in a garage sale. Maybe it was just that nagging feeling that something wasn't right about this whole visit. Whatever it was, I found myself clicking through her recent posts, looking for clues to a puzzle I didn't even know I was solving. That's when I saw it. A photo posted just an hour ago, while I was probably still folding those socks and trying to convince myself they were a thoughtful gift. Gregory Morrison sitting at some fancy restaurant, the kind with white tablecloths and waiters in bow ties. He was grinning at the camera like he'd just won the lottery, his right wrist prominently displayed to show off a brand new Rolex that caught the restaurant's chandelier lights like a disco ball. The caption read, "To the best father-in-law in the world, a gift that shows how much we appreciate everything you do for our family. Blessed, #family. Grateful." My coffee mug slipped from my hand and shattered on the kitchen floor. The sound was sharp and final, like something breaking that could never be put back together. Hot coffee splashed across the tiles, spreading in a dark pool that somehow seemed fitting. I barely noticed. I was staring at that watch, my heart pounding like I'd just run a marathon. 2 months ago, Amanda had called me in tears. I could still hear her voice, shaking and desperate as she explained that Tyler needed emergency surgery for a herniated disc. The insurance wouldn't cover it all, she'd said, and they needed $8,500 immediately, or Tyler would be in permanent pain. She'd sobbed into the phone about how scared she was, how much they needed me, how this was literally a matter of Tyler's future quality of life. I'd transferred the money that same day, no questions asked. When your only child calls you crying, saying her husband might be permanently disabled without immediate help, you don't hesitate. You don't ask for documentation or second opinions. You just wire the money and pray it helps. I zoomed in on the photo, studying every detail of that watch with the intensity of a detective examining evidence. The face was black with silver markers, the band thick and substantial. Even in the restaurant's dim lighting, I could see the quality of the piece, the way it seemed to absorb and reflect light simultaneously. My hands were trembling as I opened a new browser window and searched for Rolex dealers in Milwaukee. The results came up instantly. Westfield Jewelry, downtown on State Street. I clicked through to their website, my pulse racing as I scrolled through their inventory. There it was. Rolex Submariner, stainless steel, black face. Starting price, $8,200. With tax and fees, the website calculator showed a total of $8,547. $8,547. The same amount Amanda had borrowed for Tyler's surgery. I sat back in my chair, the broken coffee mug forgotten on the floor, feeling like I'd been sucker punched by my own daughter. The pieces were falling into place with horrible clarity. The rushed visit, the cheap gift, the excuse about dinner with Gregory. She'd played me like a fiddle, and I'd danced to every note. Amanda's voice echoed in my memory. "Dad, I wouldn't ask if it wasn't life or death. Tyler's in so much pain, and the doctors say without this surgery he might never work again. Life or death, for a watch." I stared at the screen until my eyes burned, willing the image to change, to somehow make sense in a way that didn't involve my daughter lying to my face. But the math was brutally simple. The Rolex cost exactly what I'd given her for Tyler's emergency surgery. There were no coincidences that clean, no explanations that innocent. 35 years of getting up at 5 a.m. for the morning shift. 35 years of overtime when the plant needed it. Of brown bag lunches and secondhand clothes so Amanda could have the things her friends had. I'd sold my pride and joy, a 1969 Camaro SS I'd been restoring in the garage, to help pay for her college. When she and Tyler bought their house 2 years ago, I'd given them my entire life savings, $23,000, as a down payment gift. And this is what I got in return. $12 socks and lies that cut deeper than any physical wound. I looked at those socks sitting on the counter, their $12.99 price tag still attached like evidence in a crime scene. The plastic packaging was slightly torn at one corner, probably from being tossed in a shopping cart at the last minute. The image of Amanda grabbing them from a clearance bin on her way to some real shopping made my stomach churn. My phone buzzed against the counter, a text from Carl Jenkins, my neighbor across the street. "Saw Amanda leave early. Hope you had a good Father's Day, buddy." Carl was a good man, retired from the Milwaukee Fire Department after 30 years of service. He'd lived across from us since before Amanda was born, had even helped me teach her to drive when she was 16. He'd been there through Sarah's illness, bringing casseroles and keeping an eye on the house when I spent long hours at the hospital. He knew better than most how much I'd sacrificed for Amanda over the years. I stared at his message for a long moment before typing back, "Thanks, Carl." It was educational. The word felt right somehow. Educational. Like an expensive lesson in human nature, taught by the person I'd trusted most in the world. I spent the rest of the day moving through my house like a ghost, picking up the broken coffee mug pieces, wiping up the spilled coffee, but my mind was stuck on that photo. Every room held memories of Amanda, of the sacrifices I'd made to give her a better life than Sarah and I had growing up. The piano in the corner that I'd bought secondhand so she could take lessons. The computer desk where I'd helped her with homework every night. The graduation photos on the walls that represented thousands of dollars in tuition I'd somehow scraped together. By evening, I'd made a decision that felt both terrifying and liberating. I was going to find out exactly what had happened to my money. If Amanda wanted to play games with my trust, she was about to learn that even old dogs could learn new tricks. Monday morning came gray and drizzly, typical Milwaukee weather that matched my mood perfectly. I drove downtown to State Street, navigating the morning traffic with the kind of grim determination I hadn't felt since Sarah's diagnosis. The city looked different somehow, like I was seeing it through new eyes. Maybe it was just the first time in years I'd driven somewhere with a real purpose instead of just running errands. Westfield Jewelry sat in the heart of downtown, sandwiched between a coffee shop and a boutique clothing store. The storefront was elegant but understated, with tasteful displays of watches and rings that probably cost more than most people's cars. I sat in my truck for a few minutes, gathering my courage and rehearsing what I'd say. The store was everything my little house wasn't. Polished marble floors, crystal chandeliers, the kind of place where they probably made more in a day than I'd made in a month at the plant. The air smelled expensive somehow, like leather and metal polish and money. A young woman in a tailored suit approached me as soon as I walked in. I could see her taking in my worn jeans and work boots, her smile professional but cool as she made quick calculations about whether I was worth her time. Her name tag read Jennifer, and her handshake was firm but brief. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice carrying that particular tone salespeople use when they're being polite but not optimistic. I pulled out a printout of the Facebook photo, my hands steadier than I'd expected. This watch, was it purchased here? She glanced at the photo, and I saw something flicker in her eyes, recognition maybe or concern. "Let me get our manager," she said, her professional smile faltering slightly. A few minutes later, a middle-aged man emerged from the back office. He had the kind of presence that suggested he'd been in the jewelry business for decades, someone who'd seen every kind of human drama played out over expensive purchases. "I'm David Peterson, the store manager," he said, extending his hand. "How can I assist you today?" I showed Peterson the photo again, my voice steadier than I felt. "I need to know if this watch was purchased here in the last few weeks." Peterson studied the image carefully, his experienced eyes taking in details I probably couldn't even see. The way he held the paper, the slight tightening around his eyes, told me he recognized what he was looking at. "May I ask why you're inquiring about this particular piece?" His voice was cautious, but not unfriendly, the tone of a man who'd probably dealt with his share of family drama over expensive purchases. I pulled out my bank statement, the $8,500 charge circled in red pen like a bullseye on my financial life. My hands didn't shake anymore. The initial shock had crystallized into something harder, more focused. "This is my account. I believe my money was used to buy this watch without my knowledge of what it was really for." Peterson's expression shifted as he looked at the statement, his professional demeanor softening into something more human. He'd probably seen this scenario before. Family members discovering their generosity had been misrepresented, their trust exploited by people they loved. "Would you mind waiting a moment while I check our records?" he asked, already moving toward his office. I nodded, finding myself alone in the showroom with Jennifer, who was pretending to organize inventory while obviously listening to every word. The silence stretched between us, filled only by the soft ticking of dozens of expensive timepieces marking seconds that felt like hours. When Peterson returned, he was carrying a tablet and wearing the expression of a man about to deliver bad news. "Sir, I can confirm that a Rolex Submariner matching the one in this photo was purchased here on May 15th. The total with tax came to $8,547, the exact amount." My stomach dropped even though I'd been expecting confirmation. Hearing it said out loud made it real in a way that seeing the photo hadn't quite managed. "Who bought it?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Peterson hesitated, glancing at the tablet. The primary purchaser was a young woman, early 30s, blonde hair. She was accompanied by a younger man, probably her husband. They seemed very excited about the purchase, said it was for a family member who'd been incredibly generous to them. The irony was so thick I could taste it. Generous. I'd been generous, all right, generous enough to hand over $8,500 for what I thought was my son-in-law's emergency surgery. "Was the name on the card Amanda Fletcher?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Peterson nodded slowly. "I'm afraid I can't give you more specific details about the transaction without proper documentation. But if this is indeed your card and you didn't authorize this particular purchase..." "I authorized it," I said, the words bitter in my mouth. "But not for this. I was told it was for emergency medical expenses." Peterson's face showed a mixture of sympathy and professional discomfort. He'd probably witnessed this exact conversation dozens of times before, the moment when someone realized they'd been played by their own family. "Sir, if you believe there was fraud involved, you might want to consider speaking with your bank or possibly law enforcement." I shook my head. It wasn't fraud in the legal sense. She had permission to use the card. I just didn't know what she was really buying. The distinction felt important somehow. Amanda hadn't stolen from me in any way that would interest the police. She'd just lied about what she needed my money for, exploited my love and trust in a way that was perfectly legal and absolutely devastating. I thanked Peterson for his time and walked out into the Milwaukee morning, feeling older than my 60 years. The drizzle had turned into actual rain, and I sat in my truck for several minutes, letting the sound of water on the windshield wash over me. My phone rang. Amanda's name flashed on the screen, and for a split second, I felt that old paternal impulse to answer, to be available whenever she needed me. Then I remembered the Rolex and let it go to voicemail. When the voicemail notification popped up, I played it immediately. "Hi, Dad. I was just thinking about you and wanted to make sure you're okay. You seemed a little quiet yesterday. I hope you liked the socks. I know they're not fancy, but I thought they were practical. Tyler and I had such a great time with Gregory and Linda last night. Gregory was showing off this beautiful watch someone gave him for Father's Day. Can you believe some people spend that kind of money on accessories? Anyway, call me back when you get a chance. Love you." The casual mention of the watch, the little dig about people who spend that kind of money on accessories, it was masterful in its cruelty. She knew I'd see that photo eventually. She was probably counting on it. I drove home through the rain, my windshield wipers keeping time like a metronome marking the rhythm of my anger. Every swipe cleared my vision a little more, both literally and figuratively. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I knew what I had to do. Amanda wanted to play games with my trust and my money? Fine. But she was about to learn that her old man wasn't as naive as she thought, and she was going to learn it the hard way. Back home, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a legal pad, something I hadn't used since the plant closed. Sarah always said I thought better with a pen in my hand, and today I needed to think clearly. Rain was still coming down steady outside, turning the world gray and washing the streets clean. I started making a list, not of what Amanda had done wrong, that was crystal clear now, but of what I was going to do about it. For too many years I'd been reactive instead of proactive, always responding to Amanda's crises instead of setting boundaries. That was about to change. First item, cut off her access to my money. Amanda had a credit card linked to my account for emergencies, something I'd set up after her wedding when she and Tyler were getting established. Clearly, my definition of emergency and hers were very different. Second item, find a lawyer. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about protecting myself from future manipulation and making sure Amanda understood there were consequences for her actions. Third item, change my will. Amanda was currently set to inherit everything when I died, a decision I'd made when she was still the daughter I thought I knew. If she wanted to treat me like an ATM instead of her father, she could find out what it felt like to be cut off from the source. My phone rang again. Amanda, persistent as always. This time I answered. "Hello, Amanda." "Dad! I was worried when you didn't call back. Are you feeling okay?" Her voice was bright, cheerful, with just a hint of concern that might have fooled me yesterday. Today it sounded calculated, like she was reading from a script. "I'm fine. Just been thinking." "About what?" "You sound different." "About that watch Gregory was wearing last night." "Beautiful piece." Silence. Just for a second, but long enough to tell me she was scrambling. "Oh, that?" "Yeah, it's nice, I guess. A little flashy for my taste. $8,500 worth of flashy." The silence stretched longer this time. I could practically hear her mind racing, trying to figure out how much I knew and how she could spin it. "Dad, I don't know what you're talking about. I went to the jewelry store, Amanda, Westfield Jewelry on State Street. They showed me the receipt." Her breathing changed, becoming quick and shallow. "Look, it's not what you think. Then explain it to me. Explain how Tyler's emergency surgery turned into a Father's Day gift for your father-in-law. Dad, you don't understand. Gregory has done so much for us, for our careers. This was an investment in our future. With my money. Money you gave freely." Her voice rose, taking on that sharp edge it got when she was cornered. "You said it was for medical expenses, and it was. Tyler does need that surgery eventually. We just postponed it. Postponed it for a watch. You wouldn't understand. You don't know how these things work in business. Gregory controls Tyler's future at the dealership, showing appreciation, building relationships. It's all part of getting ahead." The condescension in her voice was like a slap. Here was my daughter, the child I'd raised alone for 18 years, talking to me like I was too stupid to understand how the world worked, what things work. Lying to your father, using his money to buy gifts for other people. I didn't lie. I just adapted to circumstances. You told me Tyler was in pain and needed immediate surgery or he'd be permanently disabled. He is in pain sometimes, and he will need surgery someday. Someday isn't today, Amanda, and today is when you spent my money on a watch. God, Dad, you're being so dramatic. It's just money. Just money. There it was again, the phrase that revealed everything about how she saw me and my sacrifices. Just money, I repeated slowly. Amanda, do you know how many double shifts I worked to pay for your college? How many vacations I didn't take? How many things I didn't buy for myself so you could have what you needed? That's what parents do, Dad. That's what you signed up for when you had me. Her words hit me like a physical blow. Not because they were cruel, though they were, but because they showed me how fundamentally she misunderstood what I'd given her. In her mind, my sacrifices weren't love. They were obligation. My devotion wasn't precious. It was expected. You're right, I said quietly. That is what parents do. But you're not a child anymore, Amanda. You're 32 years old, and you just spent $8,500 of your father's money on a lie. What are you going to do about it? The question came out defiant, challenging, like she was daring me to do something about her betrayal. "I'm cutting off your access to my accounts. Effective immediately." "You can't do that. Watch me." I hung up and immediately called my bank. Within 20 minutes, Amanda's name was removed from all my accounts. The credit card I'd given her for emergencies was canceled. For the first time in years, my money was mine alone. The phone started ringing again immediately. I let it ring. By evening, Amanda had called 17 times. Each voicemail started angry and gradually shifted to pleading, then back to angry again. I listened to them all, making notes on my legal pad like I was documenting evidence, which, in a way, I suppose I was. "Dad, this is ridiculous. You can't just cut me off like this. Daddy, please call me back. We need to talk about this like adults. I can't believe you're being so petty over money. This isn't like you." Tyler's furious. He says you're trying to control our lives. Fine. If you want to be stubborn and bitter, that's your choice. But don't expect us to come crawling back when you're old and need someone to take care of you. That last message told me everything I needed to know about what our relationship had really become. In Amanda's mind, I wasn't her father. I was her insurance policy. Someone to be managed and manipulated until I was needed for something more than money. The next morning, I drove to the office of Patricia Sullivan, a family law attorney Carl had recommended. Her office was in a converted house on the east side. Nothing fancy but professional. Pat was a straight-talking woman in her mid-50s with silver-streaked hair and the kind of direct gaze that made you feel like she could see right through whatever story you were telling yourself. "So," she said after I'd explained the situation, leaning back in her chair and studying me over her reading glasses, "your daughter lied about needing money for her husband's surgery, used it to buy an expensive watch for her father-in-law, then told you it's none of your business when you confronted her about it. That's about the size of it, and you want to make sure she can't do it again." I nodded, feeling suddenly lighter just having someone understand the situation without trying to make excuses for Amanda or suggest that family should forgive everything. Pat pulled out a legal pad of her own. "Raymond, I've been practicing family law for 25 years. I've seen this story more times than I care to count. Adult children who see their parents as ATMs instead of human beings." She clicked her pen and got down to business. "First thing we do is protect your assets going forward. You've already cut off her access to your accounts, which was smart. Now we need to look at your will and estate planning." "What's wrong with my will?" "Right now, I'm guessing Amanda inherits everything when you die?" I nodded again. "So she has every incentive to keep treating you badly, knowing she'll get paid for it in the end. We need to change that dynamic." Over the next hour, Pat outlined a plan that would protect me from future manipulation while still giving Amanda a chance to redeem herself if she chose to. We'd set up a trust with specific conditions. If Amanda wanted any of her inheritance, she'd have to demonstrate real change over a period of years. Not just apologies or promises, but actual behavioral change. "This isn't about punishment," Pat explained as she drafted the basic framework. "It's about incentives. Right now, Amanda has no reason to treat you with respect because she knows you'll keep giving her money regardless. This changes the equation. What if she never changes? Then the money goes to charity, and you'll have spent your final years being treated with the respect you deserve instead of being someone's personal bank." The idea was both terrifying and liberating. For 18 years since Sarah died, my entire identity had been wrapped up in being Amanda's father, in making sure she had everything she needed. The thought of potentially cutting her out of my life completely was like contemplating cutting off my own arm. But maybe that was exactly the problem. "There's something else you should consider," Pat said as we wrapped up the appointment. "Your daughter and her husband might not take this lying down. People don't usually react well when their source of free money dries up. You might want to prepare for them to escalate. Escalate how? Could be anything. Emotional manipulation, trying to turn other family members against you, even legal challenges if they think they can make a case. I've seen people file elder abuse claims against parents who cut off their funding." The thought chilled me, but I realized it didn't surprise me. If Amanda could lie about medical emergencies to get money for a watch, she could probably convince herself that protecting my own assets was somehow abusive. What do I do if that happens? Document everything, keep records of all interactions, and don't let them isolate you. Make sure you have people in your life who understand what's really happening. I thought about Carl, about the guys from the plant who still got together for coffee every Wednesday morning. I wasn't completely alone, even if it sometimes felt that way. Walking out of Pat's office, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, the sense that I was taking control of my own life instead of just reacting to whatever crisis Amanda created next. It was scary but also oddly exhilarating, like learning to drive all over again at 60. My phone buzzed with another call from Amanda. This time, I didn't even look at it. I had work to do. The escalation came 3 days later, exactly as Pat had predicted. I was having my morning coffee when I heard car doors slamming in my driveway. Through the kitchen window, I watched Amanda and Tyler march up to my front door with the determined stride of people who'd spent the last 72 hours working themselves into righteous anger. I opened the door before they could knock, standing in the doorway without inviting them in. Amanda looked like she hadn't slept much, her usually perfect hair showing signs of stress, dark circles under her eyes that makeup couldn't quite hide. Tyler, on the other hand, looked like he was ready for a fight, his jaw set and his shoulders squared. "Dad, we need to talk," Amanda said, her voice tight with barely controlled emotion. "I'm listening." "Not out here. This is private family business." I stepped aside to let them in, but I didn't sit down, and I didn't offer them coffee. This wasn't a social visit, and I wasn't going to pretend it was. "You've lost your mind," Tyler said without preamble, his voice sharp with anger. "Cutting Amanda off like this, threatening to change your will. What kind of father does that to his own daughter? The kind who gets tired of being lied to and stolen from." "Stolen from?" Amanda's voice rose. "Dad, I never stole anything from you. You gave me that money freely, under false pretenses. I told you Tyler needed surgery. For a watch, apparently." Tyler stepped forward, his face flushing red. "You don't understand the position we're in, Ray. Gregory controls my entire career. That watch was an investment in our future, in Amanda's future. We were going to pay you back once I got my promotion." When was that going to be? Before or after Tyler's actual surgery? Amanda's composure finally cracked. "Why are you being so cruel about this? We made one mistake, and you're acting like we're criminals." "One mistake?" I let out a laugh that sounded bitter even to my own ears. "Amanda, how many times have you called me for money in the last 2 years? Your car repairs, your credit card bills, your house repairs. When was the last time you paid me back for anything?" "We're family," she shouted. "Family helps each other. You're right, family does help each other, but help goes both ways. When was the last time you helped me with anything? When was the last time you even asked how I was doing?" She stared at me like I'd spoken in a foreign language. The concept of our relationship being reciprocal seemed genuinely foreign to her. Tyler jumped back in, his voice taking on a threatening edge. "You're making a big mistake here, Ray. Amanda's your only child. When you get older, when you need care, who do you think is going to be there for you?" The threat was clear, and it hit exactly where he'd intended it to. At 60, the specter of aging alone was something that kept me awake some nights, but I'd rather face that prospect with dignity than live the rest of my life being extorted by my own daughter. If Amanda wants to be there for me when I'm older, she can start by being there for me now. And I don't mean financially, I mean actually caring about me as a person instead of seeing me as a source of money. "We do care about you," Amanda said, but her voice lacked conviction. "When's my birthday, Amanda?" She blinked, caught off guard by the question. "What?" "My birthday. When is it?" I watched her scramble for the answer, her mouth opening and closing as she tried to remember. The silence stretched painfully. November 12th? She said finally, uncertainty making it sound like a question. "November 8th. And last year, you forgot it completely until Facebook reminded you 3 days later." Her face went pale, but Tyler wasn't giving up. "This is ridiculous, Ray. You're nitpicking over details instead of focusing on the big picture. We're trying to build a life here, trying to get ahead, and you're sabotaging us over one misunderstanding." "Misunderstanding?" I felt my own anger rising. "You call lying about a medical emergency a misunderstanding?" "We never said Tyler was having surgery immediately," Amanda said, grasping at straws. "We said he needed surgery. That's still true." "Stop," I said, holding up my hand. "Just stop. You're making it worse with every word." The truth was, I could see exactly what they were doing. They were trying to gaslight me, to make me question my own memory and judgment. It was probably the same strategy they'd used successfully for years, and I was just now recognizing it for what it was. "Here's what's going to happen," I said, my voice calm but final. "I've changed my will. I've set up a trust with conditions. If you want any inheritance from me, you'll need to demonstrate real change over the next 5 years. Not promises, not apologies, but actual behavioral change. You can't do that, Tyler exploded. We'll contest it. We'll get lawyers. Go ahead. I already have a lawyer, and she says my will is ironclad. I'm of sound mind, I wasn't coerced, and my decisions are completely reasonable. Amanda started crying then. Real tears this time instead of the calculated ones she'd used on the phone. Dad, please. I'm sorry, okay? I'm sorry about the watch. We'll return it. We'll pay you back somehow. The watch isn't the problem, Amanda. The lying is the problem. The fact that you see me as an ATM instead of your father is the problem. The fact that you think my money is automatically yours is the problem. What do you want from us? She sobbed. I want you to grow up. I want you to take responsibility for your own lives instead of expecting me to fund your mistakes. And I want you to treat me with the same respect you'd give a stranger, because right now, you treat strangers better than you treat me. They left without another word, Amanda still crying and Tyler muttering threats under his breath. I watched them drive away and felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Peace. For the first time since Sarah died, I felt like I was living my own life instead of just existing to serve Amanda's needs. The next few days passed quietly, which should have been a relief, but instead felt like the calm before another storm. I kept myself busy with small projects around the house, fixing a leaky faucet, organizing the garage, tasks I'd been putting off for months. Physical work helped clear my head and gave me time to process what had happened. Carl came by on Wednesday afternoon, carrying 2 beers and wearing the expression of someone who'd been watching the drama unfold from across the street. Rough week? He asked, settling into one of the lawn chairs on my front porch. You could say that. Saw Amanda and Tyler leave the other day. They didn't look happy. Carl had a way of asking questions without actually asking them, giving you space to talk or not talk as you saw fit. It was one of the things I appreciated about him after all these years of being neighbors. They're not happy with some decisions I've made, I said, accepting the beer he offered. Financial decisions? I nodded, surprised by how easy it was to talk about it. For years, I'd kept Amanda's financial demands private, partly out of shame and partly out of some misguided sense that airing family business was wrong, but now it felt like a relief to have someone who understood. How long's it been going on? Carl asked. Since she got married, really. Maybe before that, but it got worse after the wedding. There was always some crisis, some emergency that required my help, and the help was always financial. Always. I took a long pull from my beer. I sold my Camaro to help pay for her college, gave them my entire savings for their house down payment. And last month she got $8,500 from me for Tyler's emergency surgery. Carl raised an eyebrow but didn't interrupt. Turns out the surgery was actually a Rolex for Tyler's father. Jesus, Ray. Carl shook his head. That's not just asking for help anymore. That's fraud, not legally. She had permission to use my card. She just lied about what it was for. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the neighborhood kids ride their bikes up and down the street. Normal life continuing while my own world had turned upside down. You know, Carl said eventually, my oldest went through something similar about 10 years ago. Not the lying part, but the constant need for money. Every month, some new crisis that only Dad could solve. What did you do? Cut him off. Hardest thing I ever did, but it was the right choice. Took him about 2 years to figure out how to stand on his own feet, but once he did, our relationship got a lot better. Amanda threatened to cut me out of her life if I didn't give her what she wanted. That's not a threat, Ray. That's an opportunity. His words hit me harder than I'd expected. For so long I'd been terrified of losing Amanda's presence in my life, even if that presence had become little more than financial demands and shallow visits. The idea that losing that version of Amanda might actually be a good thing was both terrifying and liberating. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize. Mr. Fletcher? This is Gregory Morrison. I think we need to talk. Gregory's voice was serious, with none of the jovial, backslapping tone I remembered from family gatherings. Something in his manner made me agree to meet him for coffee the next morning. I found Gregory waiting at a small cafe downtown, looking older than I remembered and distinctly uncomfortable. The Rolex was nowhere to be seen, which I took as either a good sign or a very bad one. "Raymond, I owe you an apology," he said as soon as I sat down. "I had no idea that watch was bought with your money." I studied his face, looking for signs of deception, but he seemed genuinely distressed. "Amanda told me it was her gift to thank me for helping Tyler advance in the company. She said they'd saved up for months to buy it. She told me the money was for Tyler's emergency surgery." Gregory's face darkened. "There was no surgery. Tyler's been fine. In fact, he's been pushing for a promotion that, frankly, he hasn't earned." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small velvet box, sliding it across the table. "This belongs to you." I opened the box to find the Rolex gleaming under the cafe's fluorescent lights. Seeing it up close, I could understand why it had cost so much. It was beautiful, substantial, the kind of watch that spoke of success and status. Everything I'd never been able to afford for myself. "I can't take this," I said. "You already paid for it. And to be honest, keeping it feels like being complicit in what they did to you." Gregory leaned forward, his expression serious. "Raymond, there's something else you should know. Amanda's been dropping hints about Tyler taking over more responsibilities at the dealership, maybe even becoming a partner someday. She's been cultivating a relationship with my wife and me, always showing up with little gifts, always available to help with social events." The picture he was painting made my stomach turn. Amanda hadn't just lied to get money for a gift. She'd been running a long-term con, using my money to buy her way into Gregory's good graces. "I've had to let Tyler go," Gregory continued, "not just because of this, but because I can't trust him anymore. Can't trust either of them. What will they do now? That's not my problem anymore. And frankly, Raymond, it shouldn't be yours either." I looked down at the watch in the box, this symbol of everything that had gone wrong between Amanda and me. "What am I supposed to do with this?" "Whatever you want. Sell it, keep it, throw it in the lake. It's yours now." We talked for another hour, two fathers comparing notes on the children who'd disappointed them. Gregory's story was different from mine, but the themes were familiar. Entitlement, manipulation, the gradual erosion of respect and love until all that remained were transactions. When we parted ways, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. I wasn't alone in this. That afternoon, I drove to 3 different jewelry stores before finding one willing to buy the Rolex. The manager at Miller & Sons Jewelry examined it carefully, testing its authenticity with tools I didn't understand, before offering me $7,800 cash. "It's a beautiful piece," he said, "but resale on luxury watches is always less than retail. Still, $7,800 is a fair price for a quick sale." I took the money, all of it in crisp hundreds that felt substantial in my hands. For a moment, I considered what I could do with it. That delayed trip to Alaska I'd been dreaming about, the tools I needed to finally finish organizing my garage, maybe even a down payment on a small fishing boat. Instead, I drove straight to the Milwaukee Veterans Center. Charles Rodriguez, the director, looked up in surprise when I walked into his office. I'd been donating small amounts to their programs for years, usually $50 or $100 around the holidays, but nothing that would warrant a personal visit. "Mr. Fletcher, what brings you by today?" I pulled the envelope of cash from my jacket pocket and set it on his desk. "This is for your programs. Do something good with it." Charles opened the envelope and his eyes widened. "Raymond, this is incredibly generous. Are you sure about this?" "I'm sure. It's money that needed to find its way to a better purpose." I didn't tell him where the money had come from, but something in my tone must have conveyed that this wasn't a casual donation. Charles had been running veterans programs for 15 years, and he'd probably learned to read between the lines when people showed up with money they needed to give away. "We'll put this to excellent use," he said. "We've been trying to fund a job training program for veterans transitioning back to civilian life. This will cover the entire first year." Walking out of the Veterans Center, I felt lighter than I had in months. The Rolex, that symbol of Amanda's betrayal, had been transformed into something that would actually help people. It felt like poetic justice in a way I couldn't quite articulate. That evening, I sat on my front porch with Carl again, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. The neighborhood was quiet except for the distant sound of kids playing in someone's backyard. "You look different," Carl said, studying my face. "Different how?" "Lighter, maybe. Like you've been carrying something heavy and finally set it down." He was right. For years, I'd been carrying the weight of Amanda's problems, her financial crises, her emotional demands. Setting that burden down felt like taking off a backpack full of rocks. "Amanda called today," I said, left a voicemail. Bad news? Desperate news. Apparently, Tyler lost his job at the dealership. She wants to work things out between us. Carl raised an eyebrow. Funny how family problems become solvable when the money runs out. She wants to meet for dinner. Says she has things to apologize for. Are you going to meet with her? I considered the question. Part of me, the part that had been her father for 32 years, still wanted to believe that Amanda could change, that this crisis might finally wake her up to what she'd been doing to our relationship. Maybe, but not yet. She needs to understand that apologies without changed behavior are just words. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, the kind of quiet that comes from understanding without needing to explain everything. You know, Carl said eventually, my kids and I have a much better relationship now than we did when I was paying for everything. Turns out when you stop being someone's bank, you have a chance to actually be their father. His words resonated in a way that made my chest tight. For years, I'd confused financial support with love, thinking that saying yes to Amanda's requests was the same as being a good father. But real love sometimes meant saying no, especially when saying yes was enabling destructive behavior. My phone buzzed with a text message. Amanda again. Dad, I know you're angry, but we really need to talk. Tyler and I are going through a rough patch, and I could use your advice. Not about money, just about life. Please call me back. I showed the message to Carl, who read it and shook his head. Notice how she's still making it about what she needs from you? He was right. Even in her apparent attempt at reconciliation, Amanda was centering her own needs rather than acknowledging the hurt she'd caused me. The message was still fundamentally selfish, just wrapped in different language. What would you do? I asked. I'd wait. If she's really changed, really learned something from this, she'll keep trying. She'll demonstrate that change over time, not just promise it in a crisis. And if she doesn't, then you'll know you made the right choice. Over the next few weeks, I established a new routine. Coffee with the guys from the plant every Wednesday. Morning, volunteer work at the Veteran Center every Saturday. Evening walks around the neighborhood instead of sitting home waiting for Amanda to call with her next crisis. For the first time in years, I was living my own life instead of just existing to serve Amanda's needs. I read books I'd been meaning to get to for years. I started a small garden in the backyard. I even signed up for a woodworking class at the community college. The freedom was intoxicating, but it was also terrifying. After 18 years of defining myself primarily as Amanda's father and provider, I had to rediscover who Raymond Fletcher was when he wasn't being someone else's solution to everything. Amanda called less frequently now, and when she did, her tone was different, less demanding, more uncertain. She was learning that I wasn't automatically available to fix whatever problems she created for herself. It was exactly what needed to happen, even if it hurt to watch my daughter finally face the consequences of her choices. 6 months after that Father's Day, I got an unexpected call from Charles Rodriguez at the Veteran Center. Raymond, I wanted to let you know about something. We have a new volunteer who's been helping with our job placement program. She's been incredible, organized our entire filing system, helped 3 veterans find employment, and she's never once mentioned that she's related to our biggest donor this year. My heart skipped a beat. Related how? Amanda Fletcher. She said you're her father, but she asked me not to make a big deal about it. Said she wanted to earn her place here on her own merit. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen for a long time, staring out the window at the small garden I'd planted in the spring. The tomatoes were coming in well, and the peppers were finally starting to turn red. Small victories, but they felt significant somehow. A year passed. Amanda and Tyler separated quietly. No drama that I heard about. No financial crisis that required my intervention. Amanda moved into a small apartment across town and took a job as a receptionist at a medical clinic. When I asked Carl if he'd heard anything about how she was managing, he said she'd been taking the bus to work for 3 weeks after her car broke down rather than ask anyone for help. Seems like she's learning, he said. We started having dinner once a month, Amanda and I. Not at restaurants, at her apartment or my house. Simple meals where we actually talked instead of her pitching me on her latest financial emergency. She never asked for money, never hinted that she needed help. When her washing machine died last winter, she went to the laundromat for 2 months rather than ask me for a loan. The change was gradual but unmistakable. Amanda was becoming someone I could respect again, not just love out of obligation. Last Father's Day, she gave me a card she'd made herself. Nothing fancy, just construction paper and markers like something a kid would make in school. Inside, she'd written, "Thank you for loving me enough to say no." I kept that card on my kitchen table for weeks, reading it every morning with my coffee. Pat Sullivan called me in August to discuss updating my will again. "How's Amanda doing with the conditions we set up?" she asked. "Better than I expected. Much better. Ready to modify the trust?" I thought about it for a long moment. Not yet. She's making progress, but I want to see consistency over time. Real change, not just temporary improvement. That's wise. People can fake change for a while, but authentic transformation takes years to prove itself. Pat was right, but I was starting to believe Amanda's change was real. She'd started volunteering at the Veterans Center without telling me, had found her own job, her own apartment, her own way of living that didn't depend on my financial support. Most importantly, she'd started treating me like a person instead of a resource. In September, I got a call I'd been half expecting and half dreading. "Dad, Tyler and I are getting divorced. It's been coming for a while, and we've both finally admitted it." I waited for the request for money, for lawyer fees or moving expenses or emergency funds. It didn't come. "I'm sorry to hear that, sweetheart. How are you holding up?" "It's hard, but it's also a relief. We were never good for each other. I think I married him partly because I thought his family's money would make me feel secure, but it just made me smaller somehow." It was the most honest thing she'd said to me in years. "What will you do now?" "Keep working, keep volunteering, figure out who I am when I'm not trying to impress someone or extract something from someone. I've got a lot to learn about being an adult." The admission was humble in a way the old Amanda never could have managed. Carl came over that evening, as he often did, carrying 2 beers and wearing his usual expression of quiet wisdom. "Heard Amanda's getting divorced," he said. "News travels fast in this neighborhood. She handling it okay?" "Better than I expected. She didn't ask me for money." Carl nodded approvingly. "That's progress." We sat on the porch watching the sunset, the same view we'd shared through all the ups and downs of the past year and a half. "You know," Carl said, "my son called last week just to see how I was doing. First time in years he's called without needing something. How long did it take? About 3 years from when I cut him off to when he really started to change. But it was worth the wait. 3 years. Amanda was only at the 1-year mark, but the signs were encouraging. I'm 62 now, and I've learned something important about being a father. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable someone's worst impulses. Sometimes saying no is more caring than saying yes, especially when yes means enabling destructive behavior. Amanda is finding her way back to being someone I can be proud of, not because of what I've given her, but because of what I finally refused to give her. She's learning to stand on her own feet, to value herself based on her own accomplishments rather than her ability to extract resources from others. The mantle clock still doesn't work, but I don't mind anymore. Time moves forward whether you're watching it or not, and some changes are worth waiting for. Those $12 socks are still in my drawer, unworn but not forgotten. They remind me of the day I finally learned that love without boundaries isn't love at all. It's just enabling wrapped in good intentions. I kept the receipt too, tucked inside the card Amanda made me. Not as evidence of what my dignity cost, but as a reminder of what it's worth. Some lessons cost $8,500 to learn. Others cost $12. But the one that matters most, learning when to say no to the people you love, that one's priceless. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, saying no becomes the first step toward saying yes to a relationship built on respect instead of dependency. The best Father's Day gift I ever received was my daughter's thank you note for finally learning to be her father instead of her bank.